Okay, I want to have somewhat of a general discussion on this. You all did pretty well, except you all have one common fatal flaw. You think like this when you need to think like this, okay? So I'm not really interested in $5 billion a year. That really doesn't help me. It's just an incremental thing. I want to raise several hundred billion a year so that we can actually do something on a reasonable time scale, because that's what's needed. So while all of your plans were somewhat sensible, in the end, they're not producing that much revenue that allows you to do anything more than incremental. And I'll tell you a couple of ways you can get up to these $200 billion things momentarily. But so which of these four proposals do you think makes the most sense?
Yes.
Well, you're biased. No, you can't vote for your own team.
Carbon tax.
Not entertainment.
Water tax.
Really? Why not entertainment?
I was going to say
That one.
entertainment.
It's the first politician to tax NASCAR is going to get a dead.
Yeah.
I would think entertainment would be
Because it's a luxury.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, that would be the easiest, that's the least regressive one of these things.
yeah, but at the same time, it's a luxury that everyone believes. Like going to a football game or baseball game or something that's so quintessentially American, everyone wants to believe that they have the revenue to do it. Taxing it makes it seem like it's not, even if it is still possible.
I don't think so. It's such a small amount. Such a small amount. The team Carbon made the point that their tax isn't regressive, and I will make. There's an argument that in fact it is regressive.
Wouldn't the water tax be regressive too? Because you can't really keep track of like water usage. Say you had a low-income family that's a big family, couldn't they potentially use?
Okay, hold that thought. I'm going to get to that because I think there's something that all the teams sort of missed in all of this, and you're kind of onto it. But back to why might the carbon tax be regressive?
Well, electricity is not a luxury, I don't think.
Right.
Like to heat your house is a necessity to be able to.
Right, and what happens when it's really, really cold?
You would die.
And when it gets really, really cold, everyone's paying a higher carbon tax, right, just so that their family can survive. So any kind of electricity-based use has to factor in weather baselines. Yeah.
Also, like lower income families usually live in houses that have poor insulation or.
I don't think that's a real issue. In fact, about the only good thing of the let's spend an Obama buck to fix potholes in county roads in the United States. That's still on, right? You got that. Got my quote there. Right to the White House. Was in fact that the low-income weatherization funds was good. There was enough funds in the Recovery Act to fund, and because it's $500 worth of work on a low-income house to do it. So that actually was good, the weatherization program. Yeah.
It's partially based upon what your internet provider is using.
Yes.
So it means that the individual isn't actually choosing to use less carbon. It's, say, eWeb that would be choosing to use less carbon.
Well, that's the basic point is that it depends on where you live. So it becomes regressive on a regional basis. You could live in certain parts of the country, like Georgia, and be forced to use coal. You don't have a choice. So because there's such regional variation on that, it's hard to nationalize that into a level playing field. Yeah.
But you don't have to build the wind turbines in. If you like, you have to build the wind turbines that you get the revenue from. Say if you get the revenue from Oregon, and you take that money and build a wind farm in Georgia. I mean, you don't.
Well, I wouldn't build one in Georgia because it's not windy there. But
or you build it in the Midwest and divert and.
Sell it straightly to Georgia. See, that's the problem. You can't do that. In no way would a consumer in Georgia ever get the benefit of paying for a wind turbine in North Dakota unless we can completely build a new grid. So that's one of the problems. But the biggest problem here is how do you set a fair baseline? And let me go to the gasoline example. All right. Because that's the easiest one to describe how you set a fair baseline. You got to drive to work and back. That's fine. Let's just assume that. And so the individual consumer goes online and puts in their profile. They drive, say, 25 miles back and forth to work every day because they have to. They don't have a choice. Whatever. They just don't have a choice. And then there's certain basic goods and services for the functioning of their family that they have to access. Okay, so that's a baseline. Say that baseline is 1,000 miles a month on their vehicle. Well, that's a baseline. And if they only pay a tax if you drive more than that baseline, because they know what their baseline is, and it's a choice to go to the coast for a weekend and add 200 miles to that baseline. And then the amount of tax you pay is a little bit qualitatively like the Tiger team. That gives you, the farther you get away from the average, the more you pay tax. That's a good approach to this. But gasoline, then, if you just taxed it at $1 a gallon, right, just higher than the current value, but not a whole lot, $1 a gallon, so the price of gas would go from $4 a gallon to $5 a gallon. Taxes would be 20% of the price of gas. It's not too different than it is now. There's 400 million gallons of gas sold every single day. That's $400 million a day times 365. It's $200 billion a year, not $5 billion a year, or $11 billion a year, or $17 billion a year. That's $200 billion a year, every year. That's $1 trillion in 5 years. So I did that quick math in my head. That's substantial revenue. That can be put into R&D and fuel cells, cellulosic ethanol. That is serious money to change out on a fast time scale. All of your schemes are raising, on an order between five. I still don't know what yours is.
About $5 billion a year.
I was just going to say that. $5 to $20 billion a year, and that's not enough to attack the scale of the problem. So you have to think bigger. Now, you guys, why don't you tax carbon at 5 cents a kilowatt hour?
You could. I mean, we were just going off of what has already been implemented.
No, I know. And that raised $6 billion a year, right? But I want, $60 billion a year.
Then it would be,
Right. And so now the question to you comes, of these strategies, which do you think, none of which will be adopted, we already know that, but what do you think is, in terms of scale, is most sellable to the American public? Because I would argue that your 7.5% VAT tax is also way too low. What is it in Britain? Does anybody know what it is in Britain right now?
It's like 18 or 20.
Yeah, 20%. People still drink beer in London pubs, where you cannot get Jimbo beer, fortunately. But yeah, but they're culturally conditioned in England to do that, right? So that doesn't mean that we can't become culturally conditioned over time. There'll be a lot of bitching and moaning because Americans are entitled to bitching and moaning, and Fox News will do interviews with bitching and moaning Americans, and decry that we're all going to crap real fast, and blah blah blah. But if part of your spending infrastructure is there, you actually get used to it. People aren't bitching about $4 a gallon gas anymore. We've all accepted it, right? People were bitching mightily when gas broke $2 a gallon back in 2003. It was an American bitch fest. Every single nightly news programs had interviews with Joe Sixpack and his, Ford F-150 mega truck full of incandescent light bulbs and Deere parts, bitching that life sucks in America because now I have to pay $2 a gallon. But all that's gone away. Over time, we've gotten used to it. It's now a fact of life that gas is going to be $4 a gallon. So you do learn to absorb these things. In the same way that your corporate Nazi bills rise, right? There's two corporate Nazi corporations in America. You know what they are?
Monsanto.
Not Monsanto, they're international. You all probably have subscriptions to them. It's Comcast and Verizon. More so Comcast than Verizon, but Comcast, they're just a monopoly now, and they're just, your cable bill goes up arbitrarily, and you just keep paying it. You just keep paying it, My cable bill is now, I don't know, twice as much as it was maybe 10 years ago. I don't really give a shit, because, it's just, it doesn't mean anything to me. I don't care. So people can make these kinds of adjustments. So given that framework, what do you think of these four alternatives would be the most useful thing to attempt and sustain it for 20 years?
I think we should do a carbon tax. Start at 0.5 cent and go to 2 cents and then 3 cents.
Either carbon or gasoline.
Okay, well, why do you say gasoline?
Because we use it.
Okay.
And because everybody, regardless of where their electricity comes
Which you think is the operationally simplest to implement? Gas, yeah. Absolutely simple, because it's already there. Everybody buys gas once a week or so. So you could know on a weekly basis what your gas tax contribution to the greater good of America would be. And you then would have the option to say, well, screw this, I'm not driving for a week. To the extent that a high gas tax would be a disincentive to driving, that would be good. And it's not like a high gas tax is unheard of. You know what the tax in Europe is on an equivalent gallon of gas? Yeah, it's $3 to $5. Now, Europeans drive half as much as Americans because their country's smaller and they're more centrally organized. They don't have strip malls in suburbia. But they've accepted high gas prices for years. And so a gas tax, significant gas tax, one that raises this $250 billion a year, is the simplest to implement, and you could see its consequences almost right away because you're reinvesting that directly into alternative transportation infrastructure. And so that's really the beauty of this. I mean, you've now raised money to build more hybrid cars directly by some American company that doesn't exist yet that makes hybrid cars. So $250 billion a year from tax revenue specifically devoted to some form of infrastructure investment is a big damn deal. And it should have been implemented a long time ago. Then we'd have a lot more hybrid vehicles. We'd have a lot more wind energy. We'd be a lot better off in terms of our infrastructure. We'd repair all these water pipes that were built in the 20s, by the way, for the most part. So we wouldn't leak 7 billion gallons of water into the Earth. Earth will give it back eventually. Yeah.
I was going to ask, would it really disincentivize the amount of driving, though? Because if you go from
it depends on the size of the tax, okay? So when gas was $2 a gallon, if you would have taxed it at $1 a gallon above your baseline, then, yeah. Because now the tax is really, it's 50%, added 50% to the price of gas.
I mean, it went up 50% anyway, so I would report to
Right, and so maybe we could get away with taxing gallon gas at $5 a gallon, right? And then we'd raise $1.2 trillion a year. I'm all for that. That would be a lot, and that would be a big disincentive. But there's a problem with that. What is the problem with making the price of gas higher?
Who's going to do it?
Well, it's regressive in a direct and but an indirect way. It's not regressive if you just establish a baseline. Why is the price of gas causes the price of strawberries in the grocery store to go way up? Yeah, because 78% of all our goods and services in the United States are delivered by trucks. We have no rail distribution center. We have rail national. But when the products get in to the distribution center, they go out on trucks. We screwed this up a long time ago by locking in a dependence to trucks. And so if you don't have separate prices for the trucking industry, which I think you should, and the general public, you're screwed. Because you don't want this to affect the price of food. Because then it kills everybody. And then it will be completely unpopular. And so you have to have this sort of tiered pricing structure for gasoline to make it work. People should be penalized. The general rule here is that people should be penalized for significant amounts of overconsumption. That's what should happen, because that's a choice. If you can quantitatively determine your approximate baseline, and this is where technology comes into play. This is what your cell phone should be doing, right? Somebody said coffee or something, and your cell phone should keep track of, or your mobile device, whatever, your personal robotic thing, should constantly keep track of everything that you're consuming, because in principle it's all taggable, right? And then just start beeping and just, or you should just program a pissed off Siri into it, saying, well, God damn it, you've already had 3 coffees per day. If you get this 4th one, you're going to have to pay this whole horrible excess coffee consumption per day tax. Do you really actually need this 4th one, right? Because we're not holding ourselves accountable. That's really the bottom line. Now, it's hard to do that, but technology can make it somewhat easier to hold things accountable. And I tell all these classes is that you can win, you can be green by just doing one simple thing. Consistently consume less than the average of some product. Because that's all that you can do as a consumer. Consume less than the average. So, the average guy like me drives 11,000 miles a year. I don't ever drive any more than 9,000 miles per year. And that's, I keep track of this. I go, well, below average. That's all I can do. And then my below average drives the overall average slightly down a little bit. And obviously, if everybody did it below average, of course, you get that down. And so some mechanisms which make us accountable for our baseline behavior and know when we're consuming a little bit over our baseline versus way over the baseline can really, really help. So the entertainment thing, I think, is also a really good target. I actually think there's more gross revenue out there than the $32 billion, but that's okay. That's a minor detail. We'll say it's $100 billion, which I think is closer to it. But, this is, right, if I go to 5 Iron Maiden concerts a year, I've either had too much Jimbo beer for that year, or, I'm really obsessed with Iron Maiden, and I'm following them around in the country, creating a bigger carbon footprint. So at some point, I ought to be penalized because my obsession is an unfair obsession with respect to the rights of the rest of the citizens of the planet. Now, there would be a great need for a cultural change to understand the concept of citizens of the planet. We're very far away from that. And there'll also be a great change to understand that you're actually not entitled to go to 5 Iron Maiden concerts a year. But because our sense of personal entitlement is growing over the last 50 years, that's only exacerbating this problem. But there are ways to fix it and we can get metered right. And that will be an interesting, I'll just conclude this rant with the following analogy. I have 2 lawyer friends of mine, which is already a bad sign. But this gets to the issue that I'm talking about. So my claim is that once the world gets to some scale, no one's entitled to personal privacy anymore. And this is what I mean. Suppose that there's a probability of 1 in 10 billion that a human will be born it's just wired really in a very bad way and figures out how to make a weapon of mass destruction in their own basement to kill 9 billion people, just for the hell of it. Okay? But that only happens 1 in 10 billion times. When the world's population gets to be 10 billion, I want every single person monitored. So that 1 in 10 billion is detected. Because that's the way things have changed. One individual, and this awareness came with the Oklahoma City tragedy in 1995. 2 guys mixing up their fertilizer on a farm got away with blowing up a building and killing hundreds of people. Now, I was in Britain, London, where they don't have Jimbo beer, we've already established that, in June of 2007, right when I was staying a quarter mile away from Oxford Circle, and there was a large-scale terrorist attack that happened. And every one of those suspects got caught in 4 days. Because in London, there are 13,000 surveillance cameras. And there are competent people that know how to data mine and do pattern recognition. And they caught every one of these guys in 4 days after that incident. And no one in Britain is running around saying, oh, we shouldn't have all these surveillance cameras everywhere. Because that's the world that we live in right now. You have to have that. And so that maps into what I'm saying about the fact that once the scale of the consumption gets so large, you, the individual, are no longer entitled anymore. You are now responsible to be conscientious at all the time. And if some government agency is required to monitor the fact and maintain you being a conscientious consumer, I'm all for that, because that will create only good. And if you happen to be mixing up fertilizer parts in your backyard, we'll catch you there too. So it's just that the world we live in is just this gigantic transactional scale right now. We need to think much, much bigger in order to get this revenue reinvested in things that make us sustainable. And the only way you're going to do that is you're going to have to tax overconsumption. That's just going to happen. Because the free market encourages overconsumption, right?
Yes, it does.
Well, this is the dilemma.
To a point.
Well, I think it does it until you get some kind of market crash because of artificial over-leveraging and all that crap. So we're all participating in an inequitable, artificial system of consumption. And Cronin's puking because of this, right? I mean, he's saying, why are we doing this? What is compelling us to do this? And that's a very hard question. I don't know the answer. That topic, by the way, is explored in this Physics 361 class, Humanities History 361 class next term. So if you're really actually interested in, were we born assholes, or did we learn to become assholes, or were we rewarded for being assholes? Who can we blame? How has this changed without history? Is this really our human nature? Probably not. But we've all sort of evolved so that we've cut ourselves off from we're disconnected from the big picture, right? We're disconnected from the concept that we're all citizens of the planet. And we should all behave better. And so the issue is, how do you get, and this is the essence of your last assignment, your Super Bowl commercial, how do you convince the viewers to collectively behave better? You're not going to be successful, but you can come up with creative ways, because that's what it comes down to. We all have to behave better. We all have to be more cognizant of the fact that we actually don't have these entitled rights that we think we do. And that water video I've seen before, it's an excellent way to demonstrate, wow, everybody needs water, right? Everybody. It's a basic human right to have water. And we're pissing that away literally. Okay.